Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all out there with us today. Good afternoon for those of you in other time zones, or good evening, depending on where you may be in the world. My name is Elias Holdman, and I'm the education representative here at Path International. We're so happy to have all of you here with us today and to be able to offer the third in our series of our Strides series, and we're very excited to have you all here today. Let's get started with a little introduction of your control panel. So you'll notice the control panel has a few different options for all of you out there. Some important ones to pay attention to would be the handouts portion of our control panel. That will allow you to download today's PowerPoint presentation as a PDF. You'll find that located towards the bottom of the control panel. Also be aware of the chat feature. That'll give you the option to connect with other members out there or other attendees and discuss what you're seeing going on. And we also have a questions feature, which will allow you to ask any questions of the presenter, most of which we will probably get to at the end of our discussion today. We hope you all enjoy this presentation, and let's dive a little bit into who your presentation's with. Stephanie M. Roeter, MA, is a Washington State University PhD student of prevention science, an interdisciplinary field that applies research on individuals, families, and their communities to the development, evaluation, and dissemination of scientifically based programs that promote physical, social, and psychological well-being. As a practicing Path International Certified Registered Instructor and ESMHL, Stephanie's primary research focus is aimed at EAL programs. Stephanie is the author of the Strengthening Families Program, How to Develop an Evidence-Based EAL Program. We couldn't be more excited to welcome her here and each of you here today to talk more about this exciting topic. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephanie Roeter.
All right, thank you so much for that great introduction, Elias. That actually will let me jump right into some of the meat of what it is that we are presenting. And I was going to just turn on my camera for just a second to say hello, and then I'll turn it off once we get started so that you can all see the presentation. So hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. If not in person, then here over this web conference. This is a great opportunity. I'm excited for, I was really excited to see the publication, the magazine come out, and to get to share this project that I've worked on pretty intensively for a few years. Originally, this project was intended to be my dissertation, and for a few different reasons, and I'll talk about those towards the end, we weren't able to scale the program up and re-implement it at that specific location within the time frame that I would need to collect data for my dissertation. So nonetheless, it's been really great to be able to still share what we've done and get the word out there and tell you all a little bit more about that process and what it involved. So with that, if you have questions, please, as mentioned, go ahead and type those into the chat box there. And then at the end, I'm leaving about 15 minutes to address any questions you have. If you have additional questions that we don't get to, or you think of something later, I know that a lot of people, including myself, often you come up with those good questions once the moment is over. So feel free to email me later. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to talk with you one-on-one and answer any questions that you have. All right, so I'll go ahead and turn off the camera here. Okay. So I originally presented this at the Path Region 9 conference, and so
Stephanie, I do apologize. It looks like we can no longer hear you. I think something's going on with your mic. Oh, heard you back.
Oh. Okay, I've turned the camera back on. I don't know if my mic went away with the camera.
We can indeed hear you again, though.
Okay, well, maybe you get to see my face the whole time then. I don't know. Let me try one more time. Okay, can you still hear me?
We can indeed. Excellent.
Okay,
thank you.
Good. Okay. All right. So since Elias already went through most of this. I'll go ahead and just leave this here. You can go back and review these slides if you'd like. Those are available to you. I have recently also begun doing some freelance work with program development and program evaluation, specifically with therapeutic riding and equine-assisted learning programs. And so that is a new venture that I am transitioning to as I near the end of my PhD program. And now I can't move forward. There we go. Okay. So with this project, with the Strengthening Families program, I collaborated with Jennifer Leach predominantly, and also Ramona Lieber from Washington State University's Extension Office in Cowlitz County. And Jennifer is the Washington State Equine Project Specialist. She also wrote the book, Beginning Horsemanship, for Washington State University's extension offices and for those clubs. And so she's very closely connected to the youth and the community there. And they also, within that same office for the Youth and Families program, they implement what's called the Strengthening Families program. And so I want to clarify, I didn't necessarily write the entire, and I didn't develop the original Strengthening Families curriculum. What happened is that we adapted it and turned it into an equine-assisted learning version of that program. And so I'll explain how that worked. This collaboration was unique. We were not working with a therapeutic riding center or accredited center. This was working with their local community members who were heavily involved with 4-H and leadership, and had been working with youth for a long time, but also had this experience with the Strengthening Families program. So it was a really unique situation. And while it had its benefits, there were also some difficulties with that in terms of accessibility and making sure we had the horses we needed at the location that we needed. And so I do believe that if this were to be implemented at an existing say PATH program, that it would actually be much more feasible. For them, the big roadblock was definitely getting those pieces in place. And so I think that if this program were implemented in collaboration with say Strengthening Families facilitators and also a center, that it would be an excellent fit. So prevention science, this was already briefly mentioned in the introduction. Essentially, it's an interdisciplinary field that applies basic research on individuals, families, and their communities to the development, evaluation, and dissemination of scientifically based programs to promote the physical, social, and psychological well-being of individuals and families. So really, this is something that attempts to capture just about everything, very broad, but essentially, instead of trying to throw programs together and put them together on our gut instinct, which can be very, very good, this looks at, okay, let's take those ideas, let's make sure that we're not recreating a wheel, that we are following what we already know about what really helps people, so that we can hopefully, from a preventive perspective, very early on, or as early on as we can in development of a child or even in adults, because we continue to grow and develop throughout the lifespan, can we make a few minor adjustments at the start, at takeoff, to change and correct potential later mental, emotional, or behavioral issues in the long run. Because if you start out at the airport and you take off, it's not too hard to change from going to Hawaii to Mexico or to Europe, right? But if you're halfway there, it gets a little bit trickier. So that's always a really nice analogy of how we think of prevention science. So what is it that we're preventing? Mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders are some of the most common, and even a lot of the physical issues that sometimes people struggle with. This mental, emotional, and behavioral part is just about always tied in some way or another, whether it's reactive or part of potentially the initial causes. So these issues, we know as of 2010, are costing the United States $247 billion annually. And economists calculate that number based on asking questions about people's personal well-being, their family well-being, the cost that it is for if someone does end up going through the criminal justice process. It accounts for a lost productivity that people experience when they are struggling with mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders, and it also accounts for the cost of treatment. In prevention science, we have 3 general types or levels of prevention. We can have universal, targeted, or indicated. And these are all still considered preventive, but essentially your audience and your reach is what differs. So on the uppermost level here, the broadest reach is the universal programs. And essentially what this does is it targets an entire population or subpopulation. So for example, if we were, so for the Strengthening Families program, actually, we invited people in the general community to attend our program. So yes, it was somewhat targeted in that we said families with children from ages 10 to 14, but you weren't necessarily, there was no one in your family who's necessarily been identified as having any kind of mental emotional behavior issue or physical issue or disabilities. So it's broadly inviting everyone to attend with the idea that when we bring up the entire population, those who are on the lowest levels or the most highest risk, they will be brought up with the means. So that whole bell curve of the health of a community goes up, including those who might be at the lower end. So generally the whole community or population that you're serving and reaching improves. And in addition, if you're doing things like improving child social competence, those kids who may not be struggling are going to probably treat and respond to and include children who may have been struggling a little bit more in a different way than they would have had they not been included. So these programs are actually extremely effective and very cost effective. However, they oftentimes get overlooked with the idea that, oh, we have to target the kids that are at risk. But there's definite benefits to doing a universal program that actually could potentially help those at-risk kids even more. So the next level is a targeted level of prevention, and this is where we might narrow it down a little bit more. So perhaps a teacher or someone has identified a child is, okay, they're not at a level where we might diagnose or try to go to extreme circumstances, or they may not need treatment, but we're seeing that maybe this person might be a little bit at risk for developing something in the future, whether it's substance use, anxiety, depression, whatever that may be. So an example might be if we were to tailor this program for families who the parents have been separated, and so now it's more of a co-parenting potential situation. Those kids are identified as being at risk. It doesn't mean that anything is wrong with them, but they are more at risk, and so that would be a more targeted intervention. Now, an indicated program, so this is a much more narrow focus where typically in an indicated program, people have been diagnosed or are most likely going to be diagnosed with some kind of ailment, or there's something very, very specific that's been identified. Maybe they're already in the criminal justice system, and so that's considered an indicated level of prevention where you are in some ways treating, but on the other hand, preventing additional subsequent issues down the road. So I like to use this program development framework when thinking of how are we going, like what's the process of developing a program on our own. So a lot of you I know have, it's like you're developing a program all the time. Sometimes as a therapeutic writing instructor, you're every, season, you're kind of, okay, where am I starting? What am I doing? And this is a nice way to sort of organize this process, but on a in a prevention science perspective, where there's the potential to run efficacy studies and effectiveness trials, where you're wanting to essentially scale this up on a much larger scale, where you're not only implementing maybe at your own site, but potentially the curriculum gets shared across the United States, or people can purchase it, whatever that may be. So on here, it starts with a theory building. So why are we choosing this route? So if you are in equine-assisted learning, are you working off of a social cognitive framework? Are you more using a behavioral perspective? And that theory building part is really important, and sometimes it gets looked over, but it's extremely important into deciding for each and every lesson that you do, what is it that we're targeting, what outcomes are we trying to get here, and what's the how. So do I believe that being in the presence of a horse is all that's needed, or do I believe that being in the presence of the horse with some structured activities and then some debriefing at the end to cognitively process through that, is that part of it? What's our theory here? And that's kind of broad, and it gets much more specific, but we don't quite have the time to cover what each of those might be. And so with this model here, I also want to point out that the arrow there, it's bidirectional. And so some people even start maybe on 3 with initial feasibility study and program refinement, where you are sort of jumping in. Maybe there's a program that's already existing and you're looking to refine it. So you might start or move back and forth between these different levels. A lot of the times, especially for those stages 1 through 5, you may go back and forth a few times. Program refinement is on there multiple times, and so it's not uncommon to have to go back, reset a few things, and start potentially back at the beginning, depending on what it is that you find. But the great thing about this is that then you end up making sure that you're maximizing your resources, that you are implementing the program you intended to, and the people that you're trying to serve are receiving the benefits and the outcomes that you intended. A very famous study that was done on a community program was the DARE program, very popular. Most people probably have heard of DARE, and millions of dollars were put into implementing this program nationwide, and with some great ideas, right? The theory seemed solid, seemed like a great idea, and when they actually ran some efficacy studies and effectiveness trials, they found that unfortunately it actually wasn't doing anything to reduce the likelihood that children were using substances later on. And so they ended up, after spending millions of dollars, having to revamp their program completely before implementing it again. So they've changed some things, and now it's been found to be more effective. So don't want to knock it down too much right now, but that's one really good and famous example of making sure that you kind of have these first initial stages in place before you go putting substantial resources into a program that you're not quite sure is doing what you think it needs to do. So this is my cutesy little kindergarten drawing here of what it is we'll be talking about today. So I'll cover some existing research, specifically some work that I've done with my advisor, Dr. Patricia Pendry at Washington State University. Some of you may be familiar with it, but we'll do a little bit of a review there. I'll talk about the current program and then share with you the results of the evaluation that we did. So first, the Path to Success study. So as I mentioned, I worked with Dr. Patricia Pendry. I was the lead research assistant on this study. I'm extremely fortunate to have had this opportunity. Patricia and I are now very good friends, and she will be a mentor for me lifelong. And it's been just the most amazing opportunity, and some of the work that we've done has had a big impact, and is something that I think that you as instructors or grant writers, this is information that if you don't know about it, you should, because this is something that you can not throw into, but you can put into your grants that'll really beef up that convincing argument that, hey, these programs are doing something really, really important. So let me tell you what that is. So in this study, this was a randomized controlled trial. And that's really important because what that means is that we are able to rule out other potential confounding factors. So other things that might be explaining why it is that this program worked or if it worked. So we recruited a total of 113 children in the 5th through 8th grade. And so we had 2 cohorts, but we ran this for 2 years. So we implemented a large group of children 1 year, randomly assigned those children to either the treatment group, which participated in our equine-assisted learning program for 11 weeks, or into the waitlist control group, who those children were registered for the program, but they would hold off on attending until after that treatment group went. So they're called a waitlisted control group. And so then we're able to compare, okay, children who did receive the program versus children who didn't. And by doing that, because of random assignment, we are able to say with pretty strong conviction that this program had a causal effect on the changes and outcomes that we found. So this is one thing that unfortunately with the Strengthening Families program, we haven't quite gotten there yet because we don't have a randomized control group. So we have pre and post measures, but we can't rule out that it was, say, something that was going on at school that created these changes. We can make some pretty good assumptions, but again, that scientific process is really important. So, but nonetheless, doing the pre-post design still gives you a good indication. It at least lets you know that you're maybe somewhat on track and that people aren't going in the opposite direction, right? But what did we find in the Path to Success study? We found that children who participated in the program had more adaptive physiological patterns of stress as measured by cortisol and saliva samples after 11 weeks of participating, and that they were better able to essentially regulate stress on the inside when they were faced with different stressors. So that's a really big and key piece there. So children participating in the program, they learned different coping skills, they learned how to sort of take a deep breath, self-regulate when they were working with the horses, and over the 11 weeks, it changed their stress physiology at home. So not just while they were at the program, but these were measures taken 3 times a day for 2 days in a row, both before and after the program. And so we saw that their daily functioning actually changed. We found substantial and significant gains in child social competence, which includes things like self-management, goal-directed behavior, responsibility taking, problem solving, self-awareness, social awareness, optimistic thinking, decision-making, and relationship skills. We also found that children, another study by Frederick, Ivy, and Lanning, they found that children who participated in there, I believe it was a 12-week program, reported increases in hope and reduced symptoms of depression. Haug also in their study found that children had a higher perceived social support, which is incredibly important. We know that social support is one of those things that can really truly make someone more resilient in the face of adversity throughout the lifespan. So that social support is very key. So I worked on that, the Path to Success program for the 2 years of data collection, and then worked on analyzing and writing up some of those papers. And in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, but what about the family? What about the parents? You know, it's so important to have that strong sense of family. And, you know, we'd have in the program, I was out there both as a research assistant, but I was also a horse handler. I was also a facilitator. And then on family day, we would have parents come out, and sometimes, unfortunately, you're like, oh, well, that makes sense why the kid that I've been working with really struggles with this. And it's like I wanted to be able to bring in that bigger picture. And what we know from a family systems theory perspective is that when you include more members of a family or of a unit, that change is more likely to happen. Because it's kind of a lot to ask a fifth grader to be the agent of change in their life when they're struggling with so much more at home. So I've always been a big fan of family level programs, and the Strengthening Families program is one that one of my other mentors, Dr. Laura Hill, has done substantial research on and is implemented in Washington State through WSU Extension. And so I was already pretty aware of this program, and I kept thinking, how great would it be if we could, instead of doing activities in the classroom, if we could reinforce these messages in the barn or in the arena with horses. And so here's just a little drawing here. So, okay, I'm familiar with equine-assisted learning. I've been working in this. I've also been a fan and am familiar with and have been learning about family level programs, especially since at WSU, a lot of the prevention science and human development work has nothing to do with horses. We focus a lot on family and children. But what if we marry those two and create a family level equine-assisted learning program? I mentioned theory was really important. So here's a nice laundry list of some different theories that apply really nicely to both of these types of programs. So on the equine-assisted learning side, particularly for the Path to Success program, we were working from a social cognitive learning framework. Very naturally, it's an experiential learning theory perspective. You're out and you're doing and you're experiencing things where you're not necessarily studying something out of a book. You're not sitting and necessarily directly talking to, say, a counselor about what you're working through. You're experiencing things and you're growing and learning from that experience, and then you might debrief, but that's not necessarily the focus of what's being done at the time. The self-determination theory is a theory of motivation, and a very good one. We don't have a ton of time. I could do a whole nother talk on that one. That's a great one to apply to equine-assisted learning and therapeutic riding settings. And then the biophilia hypothesis, which essentially says that throughout history, we as humans have been drawn to animals in one way or another, and that we are meant to essentially coexist, and that we are good for one another in some layperson's terms. From the family systems theory perspective, the Strengthening Families program specifically draws from that general family systems perspective, attachment theory, again, social cognitive learning theory, a little bit from behavioral theories, but actually the Strengthening Families program is one that tends to be less heavy on those, and also from a self-determination theory perspective. So getting into program development and design, the Strengthening Families program, how it's run is that it is an 8-week parent-child program. This one was specifically for families with youth ages 10 to 14 years old. And so sometimes this is implemented in the community. Generally, it's a universal program, so not necessarily targeting people who are at risk. Anyone is invited and can attend. Sometimes school counselors might refer people into the program, but that is not a requirement. So each week during this 8-week program, the families arrive at the location. Ours was at a church that was willing to donate the space for the classroom part. And that's pretty common for these programs that are non-equine assisted learning. So they would arrive and then break off into 2 groups. So the youth would all go together and the parents would go together. And that was for about 45 minutes to an hour. And then at the end, there was another hour that was a family session where they would share a little bit about what was learned. And those were also guided discussions and talking about working as a family together, being able to plan family meetings. And many programs after that would also then provide a meal for the families. So the program that I worked with in Cowlitz County, they had someone who would cook. A lot of times it was like a crock pot meal. So they would tend to keep costs pretty low, but they would provide this dinner. And since it was in the evenings, families really appreciated that because then they didn't have to worry about going home and cooking. They could then sit at the table, so they required that all of the families sit with their family and not intermingle. So it's not like there was a kids table with all the kids together and then a parent table. It was you had to sit with your family. And that was an opportunity to learn and practice communicating and sit together, because we know that having family meals together is an excellent way to promote well-being within the family and know each other better. Also provided in many of the Strengthening Families programs is childcare. So they would have 2 people who would have a separate room so that families that had younger children could also attend. So from the Strengthening Families program, this is before we added the equine part. We're not sure what this is. For the equine part, I'm essentially gambling on that this number would be even better. But what we know is that the Strengthening Families program, on average, for every $1 spent on this program, we receive a return in the long run of $9.60. So that's really high. That's incredibly encouraging. So for every dollar, that means that in the long run, we're not spending money on treatment. We're not spending money on substance use issues. We're not spending money on criminal justice issues. We're not losing money to productivity costs. So $9.60 is what we are getting out of that $1 that we invested. And again, so whether that's from substance use, changes in, whether the risk of conduct issues, criminal issues, and those types of things. On the parent side, we know that parents specifically benefited by having better communication with their children. They, let's see, I'm digging into my notes here since I don't have this on the slide. Here we go. They showed gains in specific parenting skills, including setting appropriate limits and building a positive relationship with their youth. Parents showed an increase in positive feelings toward their child. Parents showed gains on general child management, including setting rules and following through with consequences. And parents reported increased skills in general child management, such as effectively monitoring youth and having appropriate and consistent discipline. So here, this is what we mean by an evidence-based program. We have, with both of these, the Path to Success program and with this Strengthening Families program, we know that the things that we're doing are having an impact on a causal level on people who participate. Okay, so I wanted to get people out of the classroom into the barn, right? That was kind of my goal. So Jennifer, Ramona, and I began meeting, and essentially what we decided we would need were that we needed the Strengthening Families program facilitators. So those are people who went through a training specifically for that program. So we had to have 2 youth facilitators and at least 1 parent facilitator. There were 2 child care providers. A lot of times this was interns or volunteers who were already working through Extension, who of course had background checks and everything that was needed for that. And then 1 person who served as a cook. Added on to that, for the equine component, we had 1 equine specialist. So sometimes that was me. Longview is actually, in Cowlitz County, is actually a 6 to 7 hour drive from Pullman, where I was at the time, and so I wasn't able to be there each week, but I tried to get down there at least 3 times. And then Jennifer Leach, with her experience, she was more than qualified to run these sessions as well. She's taught many clinics and workshops and worked with kids and horses for a very long time, and so she was more than, in my mind, qualified to be out there leading these. There were about 6 to 7 equine handlers, at least 1 per horse, and then 6 to 7 equines. So sometimes children had to share horses. We had 9 children, and other times, depending on absences, some children were able to have their own horse on those days. And then I was the program development and evaluation specialist. So with the equine part, we couldn't necessarily run absolutely the whole program and everything in the barn. I mentioned that we went to a church, which happened to be down the street from where our equestrian center was. So they would meet at the church, and then depending on which session was doing the equine part, so for example, in orientation week and in the first week, people would arrive, they'd break out into their parent and youth sessions separately, and then at I think it was 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, they would meet for the family part, walk down to the barn and have that part of it, that last 45 minutes down there before going back to the church for dinner. Sounds like a lot, but it was actually very close by, and so it worked out really well. If a center had a classroom on site or even just a bigger space, that could be fairly easily managed. So how it worked out is we ended up having the first orientation week, and then the first official week, the whole family would have the equine session. In weeks 2 and 3, only during the youth session, just the children would walk down to the barn, and so they were able to work with the horses, and parents weren't there for that, but then they would go back to the family session and during dinner share what they talked about. But this was really specifically focused on the youth goals and objectives in that lesson. So we would adapt that part of the lesson to be equine assisted learning rather than a classroom based session. During week 4 was the only parent only day. So the parents went down and kids, which they were somewhat accepting of, were, you know, kids stayed back, parents went during their session. And then the weeks 5 and 6 was the whole family again. And during week 7 and 8, we decided during our planning phase that there was really so much already happening during those weeks, and there wasn't really anything that could be swapped out during those weeks, and so we didn't have horses, the horse component during weeks 7 and 8. So the process of adapting this program, first we identified and we looked in the curriculum for strengthening families, and we identified our session objectives. So what were the main goals? What were we trying to do with each of these lessons? And then we would look at the core components. And fortunately, with the Strengthening Families program, there's a list for what those core components are that the Strengthening Families program says, okay, you can change things in the program, but these core components have to be there, or else you're no longer running a true Strengthening Families program. So each week we went through and using that list, and also with Jennifer's extensive background running Strengthening Families, we went back and forth and negotiated and decided what were the non-negotiables for what it is that we could adapt and turn into an equine assisted learning lesson rather than a classroom-based lesson. They were skeptical, I have to say, at first when I told them that equine assisted learning activities would meet some of their objectives. It was a pretty fun process. They were quite excited to hear some of the ideas that we had and what some of those adaptations might be. And so it all worked out. We ended up getting, you know, the 6 sessions with the horses. And so that was a big, I think, achievement in terms of adapting the curriculum. So we also had to ask, you know, is this feasible? How much time will it take? Finding the right facilities were important. Finding the right equines was obviously a bigger concern for them because they weren't already running a therapeutic riding program, and then constantly considering each week what safety concerns do we need to address. Here's just a little lesson example. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly so that we can have some time for questions after I run through the evaluation results. But for example, so a youth goal during session 3 was that youth will learn to identify situations that may cause stress, identifying stress symptoms, and learn healthy ways of coping. And so there were 20 minutes of classroom activities that were non-negotiable. So these were things that Jennifer felt really couldn't be taken out and that we needed to talk about in the classroom before going to the barn. After that, we went to the barn for 30 minutes. And the activity was, first of all, reading equine behavior, recognizing potential signs of stress, what it might look like when a horse is dealing with and relaxing after potential stress. And if we could see some of those relaxation signs by giving the horses a little equine massage. Now, obviously, this is not the equine massage that we pay, hundreds of dollars for to spoil our horses. This was essentially petting the horses in long, slow, steady motions with silence in the arena. So a very, very basic, relaxing sort of way to spoil and gently pet the horses. And the rationale here is that this activity would help to improve children's ability to read others. We had them watching for signs of relaxation in the horses, whether it's dropping their head, licking their lips, relaxing a hind leg, sighs, blinking, those pretty typical signs of relaxation. We asked them to watch for those. With the idea that maybe if children can read those behaviors better in animals and horses, perhaps that'll translate to people, right? So we might be able to recognize not only those signs of relaxation, but maybe when someone isn't relaxed. It's intended to help with emotion regulation and is also something that's known to aid in physiological down regulation in youth, is engaging in activities like this, whether it's just sitting quietly or yoga or getting a back rub. We all know that those are things that can help, and we also know that people giving a back rub or a massage can be very relaxing for that person as well. Not that that needs to be our only go-to stress reduction, but it's an example, right, where we definitely always, I've run this activity several times in different programs, and it always seems to be a winner in terms of helping people, particularly who are anxious, to down-regulate and relax. After that, we would debrief, beginning with a round of compliments. This is an activity that came from the Strengthening Families program. It's one that is surprisingly very difficult for people to do and is good to be practiced each week, of learning how to give a real compliment, not a backhanded compliment, not a sarcastic one, but a true compliment to someone else. So that was a good practice. We would then ask children for this activity, did your horse seem to appreciate the massage? How did you know? Was there anything that surprised you about giving the horses a massage? How can we express care and compassion to our family members? And applying that into sort of the bigger picture. So we ran a couple different things along with this to look at the process and both the outcomes. So process objectives, we wanted to know, we had to think about, who is going to make this happen? So who are our facilitators? What volunteers do we need? How are we going to make it happen? Where does this happen? How can the process improve? So I'll get to some more specific questions that we asked for our program here. Outcome objectives, these are questions that ask things like for whom, in what context, why, so what are the mechanisms of change, like what is it that's driving this, and for what. Our specific process objectives were what worked well or not well for staff and volunteers, what adjustments can be made. Parents and youth feel the equine-assisted learning activities related to the program objectives. What did parents and youth like or dislike most? And what could we do to make the program better? So we were asking these questions sometimes week to week. We would stop and talk to the equine handlers after each session. We also talked to the facilitators to make sure that they felt supported and that this was a process that was manageable for them and not either too much of a burden, that it made sense. Our outcome objectives, we wanted to know about child and parent communication. Was that improving? We wanted to know about whether the family cohesion and environment was changing. We also wanted to know about stress and coping. So for our evaluation design, we, as I mentioned, had weekly reflections and feedback with the staff. We also had a post-test parent and child paper and pen surveys and a post-test parent group. Not on here, I want to mention, we also, the Strengthening Families program has an evaluation. They run for all of their programs. That is a pre-post. And so that is another one that we were able to look to see, and we could in the future compare whether this program is at the same level or as effective on those outcomes as the other programs. But that will require quite a bit more sampling and data collection than what we had and able to make that comparison. So for the parent survey, we had 5 parents there that day to complete the survey. 3 of the parents had attended all 7 sessions. 2 parents reported missing 2 sessions. On the parent survey, asked questions that were really around, do you feel like the horses or the horse activities had an effect on motivation for attending? And everyone said absolutely yes. So this is on a scale from 1 to 4. So everyone said, oh yes, that was a big part, whether it was for themselves or their children. Some people wrote on their survey, like, my husband wasn't excited, but then he was okay with it later, and what they said in the interviews. They were all likely to recommend this program to others. So anything a 2 and above, or a 3 and above for sure, was yes, or very much yes. So very likely to recommend. They felt that working with the horses helped them to practice, give praise and support to their children. It helped them with problem solving with the family, building family relationships, communicating expectations, reading others' body language, understanding their own body language, and getting along with other family members was, as you can see, not the highest rated, but still on the yes side of that scale. During the parent interview, so this was run focus group style, so all the parents together, the main themes that we found were that they felt that horses were a source of motivation for kids. Parents and youth who initially were not interested in horses warmed up to them and eventually looked forward to seeing them. Parents reported that kids also enjoyed classroom material and lessons, and that the concepts, they were looking for sometimes things to be a little bit more concrete. They were worried that maybe the kids didn't always grasp everything right away, but that they did later. Parents felt that the horses brought value to the program. Parents felt that much of their learning was in retrospect. So they were at the program and they'd go through this experience, and then they'd be on the drive home, or they'd get home, and at 10 o'clock at night they go, oh. So kind of a delayed processing there, which is good to hear, because that means that they're thinking about it when they leave. And that's not always the case, right? Parents were unsure if their kids made the connection to equine-assisted learning objectives, or if that concept stuck, which is, you know, a fair concern. I do think, and I feel pretty confident that with the results we had from the Path to Success program, in the randomized controlled trial, that I have a very good feeling that this information stuck, and it's just kind of a hard one to necessarily see in the moment. Parents wanted some kind of handout summarizing each of the session's lessons so that they could reflect on them better together, either during dinner or at home, which was really encouraging. Essentially, they want more. They were eating this up. The scheduling time was a little bit tricky. It was Saturday evenings, so understandably that was kind of tough. And that decision was made because of the timing for bringing the horses in, and the equine volunteers. That was a better time for them. Parents really appreciated having childcare available for younger kids, and they also really enjoyed the meal. On the child survey, 7 of the children completed the survey. On average, they were about 12 years old. 6 of the 7 who completed the survey had attended all of the sessions. The child who didn't only missed 1. And we asked them a few different questions. One of them being, did you prefer to work with the horses in the youth only sessions, family sessions, or both? Most of them said, so 6 of the 7 said both equally, which is really encouraging, Because then there's that question of, well, should we include families and parents? You know, do kids feel like they need more time on their own? And really, they said that they liked both. They liked being able to have time alone and with their parents as well. Asking them about how they felt about the role and the contribution of the horses to their learning experience. All of the children, again, these are all very positive results. So they felt that they mastered a skill with the horses. So that sense of mastery and competence is very important in development. They felt better able to recognize stress in others, better able to cope with stress, better able to problem solve, communicate their thoughts, communicate with body language to help others, get along with family, work with family. They felt more confident because of working with the horses. They felt like they were able to bond with their family and also communicate with words. All right, so with that is the presentation part. We have left on the hour, but I know that we can go over that time, is my understanding, if needed, if there are additional questions.
We can indeed.
Yeah. So,
and we do have a few really good questions out there.
Great.
The first question, it looks like, is if our center doesn't have the background to start an initial feasibility study of shape efficacy studies, what resources should we look in for the community to be able to make an evidence-based program model?
Great question. So I think what I'm hearing here is sort of, where do we find these different resources? And I would strongly encourage you to see what agencies are there. So some examples, I worked with the WCU Extension Office, which there should be an extension office in every county, in every state in the United States. I don't know about other places. And that sometimes is either, they might have programs like the Strengthening Families program, or they may be able to connect you to another agency. There's sometimes child welfare services can make referrals. So they may have, excuse me, programs that are already being implemented that are evidence-based. I suppose you definitely want to still use your judgment and look into those programs, because there are certainly many programs out there, like the DARE one that I mentioned, that do get thrown together and are implemented pretty widespread without that backup. So it is tough. And as far as one specific place to go to look for what programs are evidence-based, there used to be the SAMHSA. It's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association. They had a database of programs that you could filter through, looking at families or youth or whatever outcomes it is that you were targeting. But there's been some government level changes that website has been taken down, with the plan of another one being implemented. So we're all really crossing our fingers that comes out soon. So that's a good starting place. You could also reach out and find if there's mental health professionals in your area who have some suggestions. So it really depends on where you're at. But once you kind of find, I've noticed that in almost any community, it's like once you access one of those kind of good agencies in your community, they'll be like, oh, there's this and this and this program. And so I think, especially for the equine-assisted learning programs, that rather than trying to become an expert in a field of child development or mental health or that kind of thing, and doing both parts, that collaboration can be really helpful. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer and a thorough answer. Speaking of which, we've got another really great and thorough question. Did the Strengthening Families program have mental health professionals as well? Were there any instances where it was decided a family needed to transition from equine-assisted learning to equine-facilitated psychotherapy?
Oh, great question. So in our orientation, we talk to families and children and specifically let them know that we are educators and not counselors, and that if something is disclosed that, you know, we may be obligated to report, but at the same time, of abuse, but at the same time, if we do see indications of more severe mental health issues, that we could refer them to outside sources. In that area, we didn't necessarily have an equine facilitated psychotherapy, but Jennifer definitely had great connections to community and school counselors that those referrals would have gone to. They were not, though, kicked out of our program. We never had that. You know, I think that even if there were other issues that come up, unless it's a safety concern, those families would have been still very welcome to participate, as long as they were aware that, you know, this isn't necessarily psychotherapy or counseling. This is a learning program. And so, you know, they can learn the material, but then for those other maybe bigger issues, they could be referred somewhere else.
Excellent, thank you. How about, do you offer follow-up sessions to reinforce the objectives after a family's worked through the program, or was your program a set number of weeks?
Oh, great. So this program was a set number of weeks, but the Strengthening Families program does have booster sessions. We didn't have them for the equine part. Again, we really struggled. That was one of the big limitations, is that because this wasn't set up as an equine-assisted learning center, it was very much volunteers coming in and bringing horses and in that way, but they do offer classroom-based booster sessions where they could, yes, come back and refresh and advance a little bit if they liked to.
Did you include any ring or horse time to teach the skill of giving compliments, or was that classroom time?
That was wherever we happened to be at the moment, but it was, so even when we were in the arena and we had the compliments, we would have the horses off with the handlers, and for debriefing was always away from the horses. So we'd stand in a circle or sit in a circle outside the arena, or, you know, standing if we're inside the arena, and just go around and give that round of compliments that way. And people could compliment either people or their horses. That was okay. Particularly for some people, giving a compliment to whether it was a peer or a sibling or a parent was actually really difficult. And so sometimes starting with the horse was a very good way to get started on what a compliment really sounds like. So
That's a good call for sure, and a good kind of stepping stone there. Looks like
yes.
we had another one. Did the ESMHL help with progress notes, or did the Strengthening Families program record all post-session notes?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding. So I guess well, let's see. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question completely. So the person who is the lead equine facilitator, she would, because I wasn't there each week, she did sit and debrief with her volunteers and facilitators and took those notes each week. And if I were there, I was included in that, and we would co-facilitate those. And then after each week, whether it was teleconference or in person, me, Jennifer, and Ramona, so the lead facilitators and equine specialists, would meet for about an hour and compare notes, what needed to change, what we would change for next time. I hope that's what you're looking for there.
Yeah, I think so. And it looks like we've got one more remaining here today. Can you share a bit more on how the value of the program per dollar was evaluated and how my program could do similar calculations?
Oh, great question. So those numbers were from a research study that was actually conducted in Washington State. And I suppose learning how to do it's called a benefit cost evaluation. And if you are unfamiliar with the process, I strongly recommend seeking out the guidance of an economist or someone who specializes in evaluation who has that experience, because it is a fairly complicated statistical process. So I would not advise venturing to that on your own, but one thing that you can definitely do to help that process along, if you do want to do it, is start making sure that you're accounting for how much the program itself costs as accurately as you can. If you can, collect those pre-post that information, that data, by running your basic evaluations, things like capturing social competence or some of these other outcomes that we looked at, those are indicators of risk, and you can use those to begin building to see what that cost benefit is in the future. But it honestly does take quite a bit of effort in terms of data collection and some tricky analyses once you get there. So I guess I would say, as far as the center goes, really just making sure you are doing something to capture what's going on. You may want to collaborate with someone on that as far as figuring out what it is that you should be measuring, because every program is different. So it wouldn't maybe make sense to capture, I don't know, substance use in certain populations. So it really depends on what your goals are and what outcomes you're trying to target.
Sure. So it sounds like maybe that's one of those things you want to kind of figure out what your goals and the aims are of the program in particular, and then sort of maybe get with an economist or an expert in the field on that sort of fiscal side to understand how you need to quantify those outcomes.
Yes, definitely.
All right. I think that's an excellent spot to stop. What wonderful information today, Stephanie. Thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you everyone. And on this last slide, I just want to point out there's an email address there. You can also feel free to call or text me if you want to have a conversation. Sometimes calling where I live, the service isn't great, and so I don't always get to see those missed calls, but I get voicemails, and text messaging though is actually usually probably the quickest way to get a hold of me if you need to do so urgently. So, but
Thank you for offering that up for our members.
Yeah.
It's always really wonderful to be able to touch back base, because I think you're dead on what you discussed at the beginning of the presentation. We always kind of think of those excellent ideas a little bit further along, and actually it sounds like kind of what would happen in the program to some degree. Actually, 3 hours later, now I'm thinking of a really good thing.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. Well, definitely reach out, use your resources, members out there. Once again, we're so happy you were able to join us, and were able to join us for the entirety of this Strides webinar series. We hope you'll join us for the next webinar series, our EAL celebration, over the course of this summer. And in the meantime, we hope you've enjoyed yourselves. We hope to see you again soon, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks again for using Path International Education.